Good morning. On this 9th Sunday after Pentecost, we are continuing with our family reunion series. We are again in the Jacobean narratives, or the stories about Jacob in Genesis. Today we are in Genesis 32, verses 22 through 31. This story of Jacob wrestling with a man, an angel, God. This story is one that tickles our imagination. It is one that forms a core identity for the Jewish people, and thus a core identity for Christians who come out of that tradition. Jacob is a person who can often be troubling for us. As we discussed a couple weeks ago, when it came to that story of Jacob tricking Esau and stealing his birthright from that lentil stew, or when we heard that story of Jacob putting skins on his arm and receiving the blessing meant for Esau from his father, for many of us, those stories are deeply problematic. We do not like to think that someone who is so devious, so manipulative, could be the one who receives God's blessing. As we have considered Jacob over these last few weeks, we see that nature of the trickster, the one who is roiling around in his identity and with his inheritance, and not just the monetary inheritance, but this covenant that has been passed on from generation to generation, that this person who is struggling with that continually emerges, and he seems to continually take the easy way out, or the devious route, or the way that doesn't seem honorable to us. Why in the world would God choose this person, is what we're often left asking. But as I said, this story and Jacob as a person is incredibly important to the Jewish identity. And furthermore, this story and Jacob's actions in it are often held up as a model for a faithful life. And so it is critical that we dive into it and understand it more deeply. First, we need to consider Jacob as an individual. As you remember, he was in the womb with Esau, his twin brother, and while they were in the womb, their mother felt so much turmoil going on within her that she prayed to the Lord and said, "What is going on?" God said, "Within you are two nations. One is greater than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger." So as she experienced this movement within her, she understood that fundamental striving that was happening was going to be happening throughout the lives of her children. And it seems that bears up. When Jacob and Esau are being born, Esau emerges and Jacob is holding on to his heel. The name Yaakov or Jacob is actually a term that can mean trickster. It also can mean heel. So it's this tremendously evocative name. As Jacob's life progresses, he seems to live up to this trickster, to this one who is constantly surveying the circumstances and looking for a shortcut into a situation. He cheats Esau out of this birthright. He then cheats Esau further out of his blessing that he will receive from his father. That prompts Jacob to hightail it under the pretense of finding a wife to his mother's brother Laban. As he is on that journey, he sees the house of God with angels ascending and descending up and down a staircase, and he hears from God that God will honor the covenant that has passed to him through his father's blessing, even though that was not the right way to receive that blessing. Jacob goes on to his uncle's house. You know how he is cheated out of the wife that he prefers, ends up with not one wife, but 2 wives, and then 2 enslaved people whom he takes as wives. And he ends up with these 12 sons and 1 daughter. As we encounter this story, Jacob is moving ahead of Laban, who has come after him because Laban believes that he has cheated him out of something. And honestly, why wouldn't he? He's Jacob. And he is moving in front or towards Esau. He has a report that Esau is coming towards him with enormous amounts of people. And Jacob is convinced that Esau is coming to kill him. You see him in the beginning of this pericope, in this passage. You see him deciding that he is going to send on his wives and children and his livestock. He's going to send all of his wealth in front of him, just in case that might appease Esau. Here he is once again looking for the other entrance to this problem, looking for a way around it. All of his people have gone on ahead of him. He is left by the river Jabbok, and that is where he decides to lie down for sleep. Now, if you'll remember, the last time that Jacob was alone is when he has the vision of the angels ascending and descending, and he anoints that rock Bethel. Here, Jacob is alone again, and this time it's not the covenant renewing language that he experienced the previous time he slept on his own. This time, the man attacks him during the night, and rather than submitting, rather than doing anything passive, Jacob engages this foe. He doesn't try to escape. He completely and totally enters into this conflict. We are told that it is right before dawn. For those who were used to telling stories and used to hearing stories being told by other people in this oral tradition, their ears would have pricked up, because that time before dawn is an incredibly powerful time in the stories of the Hebrew people. It is that time before dawn that amazing things happen. It is the time before dawn, you might remember, that the stone was rolled away and Jesus rose. It is a time when there is power coming into the world. Jacob releases the man, and the man offers Jacob what he wants. Now you'll recall, Jacob has already stolen a blessing in the form of a birthright. He has stolen a blessing in the form of an inheritance as he was dressed as Esau. He has received a blessing in the morning after watching these angels ascend and descend. For some reason, these other blessings are not doing it for him. But this time, he asks God for a blessing and he receives it. So why is Jacob so instructive for us as people of faith? First, in this passage, we see Jacob returning to a place of pain and suffering, his relationship with Esau. Jacob knows that there is going to be a reckoning somehow. He sends his wives and children and property before him. But Jacob is still returning to this place of pain with hopes that there will be reconciliation. And that is very important for us as people of faith. We need to be people who are seeing our pasts for what they are and are returning to the places of pain that we have caused with hope for reconciliation. The second thing is, despite the fact that he handles the news that Esau is coming to him by fleeing again, Jacob doesn't really go very far. He backs off and makes an effort to collect himself. Now that might not sound like a big deal, but think about Jacob as a twin. As one of the commentators I read this week said, it's very likely that Jacob had spent very little time by himself as a human being. He is not the son who goes out hunting alone. That is Esau. Jacob is the twin who is near the tent with his mother, who is constantly in the presence of other people. And we can see from his personality that he is somebody who doesn't necessarily have a strong sense of who he is. At this point in his life, he has 4 wives and 12 sons and 1 daughter and numerous livestock. He is constantly surrounded by other people who probably give him his sense of self. And you see in Jacob's story that it is when he is by himself that he encounters the Lord. One has to wonder if he takes this retreat and takes this time to himself in hopes that he will experience God with the same kind of immediacy that he experienced God as a young person on the doorstep of the Lord. The third thing is that when Jacob encounters the man during the night, he does not submit. You contrast that with the encounter he had with God when he saw in a dream the angels ascending and descending. After that experience, he made a very conditional agreement with God. He says, if God will be with me and watch over me and give me food and clothes, then I'll make God my God. It's a very immature understanding of what God is going to offer. This time, he is grabbing hold of this experience and he is going to get something out of it. Fourth, in this striving, Jacob recognizes something about the character of God. What Jacob recognizes is a God who is willing to engage with him at a very basic level. So many of us are afraid that God is not going to be able to handle the things about us that are complicated and frustrating. And we are afraid that if God understands that we are not the person that God made us to be, that God will let us go. Jacob seems to understand that this man, whom he names as God, will not let him go. Thus, Jacob is going to continue this wrestling until he gets what he needs. It is as a result of this wrestling that Jacob receives a brand new identity. He is no longer going to be Jacob, this name that could mean trickster or heel. Instead, he is going to be Israel, which is going to honor this struggle that he has had both within himself and also without in this very real setting. Israel is the one who strives. When he asks the man for the man's name, the man does not respond with his name because that would have been too holy. And that's when Jacob realizes he has wrestled with Yahweh and he has lived. And so he calls this new place Peniel, or the face of God. I wish this passage went into the next chapter, because in the next chapter you see what our monologue shared with us. You see Esau embracing Jacob, forgiving him, and you also see Jacob making some connections about this process of wrestling God. In fact, he says in the next chapter, verse 11, to see your face is like seeing the face of God. There is something in his understanding of himself and his relationships that has changed. What has changed? Well, it's almost entirely how Jacob thinks of himself and how he thinks of himself in relation to God. To me, that is perhaps the most instructive aspect of this story. Jacob has been defined from before he was born as the one we don't want to emulate. And yet here we see him engaging God, wrestling out that identity that he has lived into and cultivated, and coming up with an understanding of himself as the one who strives and the one who wrestles, but that is shaped by God into a redemptive quality. It leads me to wonder, how is it that we have thought of ourselves? How is it that we have lived into a name that we have given ourselves, or that we have understood about ourselves that somebody else gave to us, and we have not understood that God could reshape that and reform that into a redemptive quality? This is important for you and I as people, and it's important for the church. We must recognize God has an identity for us that can only be found when we are seeking and contending with this one who wants to redeem us. May God give us the courage to wait alone, to expect God to show up, to wrestle out all of those things that we have been defining ourselves by that are not necessarily who God wants us to be. And may God give us the strength to claim whatever name God gives us that is a symbol of the redemptive love that God has for us. Amen.